Have you ever stopped to notice how some women behave as if they were the center of the universe? As if every man who approaches them should feel privileged simply to be in their presence, as if breathing the same air as her were an honor few deserve. If you've experienced this, if you've ever found yourself walking on eggshells around a woman who acts as if she's the eighth wonder of the world, you're not dealing with high self-esteem, my friend. You're dealing with one of the most complex, manipulative and destructive psychic structures in modern female psychology, the compensatory superiority complex. And today, through the merciless lens of Freudian psychoanalysis, we'll dissect this phenomenon that is destroying relationships, creating insecure men, and fueling an entire generation of women who believe they are unattainable prizes, when in fact they are emotional time bombs waiting to explode. Freud taught us a fundamental truth that modern society refuses to accept. Every superiority complex stems from a deeply rooted feeling of inferiority in the unconscious. It's like a psychic tumor, growing in the dark, fueled by years of neurotic compensation. When a woman behaves as if she were a walking trophy, demanding constant adoration, special treatment, incessant validation, and reacting with fury when she doesn't receive the devotion she deems deserved, she isn't demonstrating genuine confidence. She's putting on a desperate performance, a pathetic and exhausting spectacle to hide from herself and the world, the existential emptiness that corrodes her soul like acid. This woman isn't a prize. She's a prisoner of her own insecurities, and she's turned you into the jailer responsible for feeding her delusions of grandeur 24/7. The psychological mechanism behind this behavior is both fascinating and disturbing, revealing the darkest layers of female personality formation. In childhood, this woman likely received attention and validation not for who she genuinely was, but for what she appeared to others. Perhaps she was the pretty daughter who always heard compliments about her physical appearance, while her intellectual or emotional qualities were ignored, or the intelligent girl who only received parental love and approval when she performed academically, when she achieved perfect grades, when she stood out from the rest of her children. Her childish psyche, still developing and incapable of processing complex nuances, interpreted this dynamic in a primitive and dangerous way. I am only valuable when I am special, when I stand out, when I am better than others, when everyone desires and envies me. And thus was born the psychic parasite that would dominate her, control her, and destroy her relationships for the rest of her life. This original narcissistic wound becomes the core around which her entire adult personality is organized. She hasn't developed a solid identity based on inner values, real achievements, or authentic human connections. Instead, she's constructed a fictional persona that depends entirely on external validation to exist. It's like a house of cards that needs to be constantly reinforced by new praise, new confirmation, new sacrifices from men willing to feed her fantasy of greatness. Now, as an adult, she compulsively recreates these unhealthy dynamics in all her relationships. She needs to feel superior, unique, irreplaceable, constantly admired and desired. And to achieve this, she has developed a sophisticated arsenal of manipulative strategies that transform men into providers of narcissistic validation, into emotional slaves programmed to confirm her supposed exceptionality. She doesn't want a partner. She wants a worshipper. She doesn't seek love. She seeks constant confirmation of her supposed superiority. She doesn't desire intimacy. She desires to be worshipped as a goddess who occasionally bestows her graces on ordinary mortals. Observe the signs that reveal this unhealthy psychological structure. She always positions herself as the injured party in arguments, even when she's clearly in the wrong, even when the evidence against her is overwhelming. For her, admitting a mistake, acknowledging a flaw, accepting responsibility, would be to shatter the entire fantasy construct of perfection that sustains her fragmented identity. It's literally impossible for her to accept that she might be wrong, because that would mean accepting that she's not superior, that she's not special, that she's just an ordinary person with flaws like everyone else. She uses phrases like, "You don't deserve me. I could be with anyone. You're lucky to have me." No man I know would do this to me. My ex never treated me like this. These aren't declarations of confidence. They're desperate mantras she repeats to herself, trying to convince her subconscious of a truth she knows, deep down, is completely false. Each repetition of these mantras is an attempt to hypnotize herself into believing her own propaganda. A woman with a superiority complex has developed a dangerous tolerance for admiration, just as an addict develops a tolerance for drugs. Like a drug addict who needs ever-increasing doses of the substance to feel the same effect, she needs increasing levels of adoration, sacrifice, and devotion to feel the same temporary relief from her deep-seated insecurities. What began as a few casual compliments now demands epic declarations of love, grand gestures that demonstrate her importance, constant sacrifices that prove her superiority, personal sacrifices that confirm that she is worth more than anything in a man's life. And yet, nothing is ever enough, because the hole she's trying to fill doesn't exist in the real world. It exists in your damaged psyche. It's an emotional black hole that devours all the energy, attention, and love you can offer, always asking for more, always demanding greater proof, always questioning whether you truly love her. Enough whether you truly recognize how lucky you are to be with her. Freud identified that these individuals live in constant terror of being discovered as frauds, ordinary people disguised as special. Beneath the mask of superiority, behind all that arrogance and constant demands, lies a child terrified of being rejected, abandoned, considered ordinary, discovered as someone who isn't truly extraordinary. That's why they constantly test you, not to see if you love them, but to see if you still believe in their performance, if you're still willing to maintain the illusion. Each test you pass temporarily feeds your narcissistic need, momentarily calming the existential terror of not being special, but also increasing the level of demand for the next test. It's a downward emotional escalator where you can never stop proving your love, your devotion, your recognition of her superiority. And the more you prove, the more she needs greater proof. These tests take increasingly elaborate and cruel forms. She flirts with other men in front of you to see if you'll react with jealousy, confirming that you recognize her as desirable and can choose anyone. She creates situations where you have to choose between her and other priorities in your life, family, friends, career, forcing you to demonstrate that she's more important than anything else. She invents emotional crises at strategic moments to test whether you'll put everything aside to comfort her and solve her problems. The sexual dynamics of these women reveal even more disturbing and revealing aspects of their distorted psychology. They often use sex as a tool of validation and control, not as a genuine expression of intimacy, pleasure, or emotional connection. During sex, they are more concerned with their own performance and the reaction they are generating in their partner than with genuine pleasure or the shared moment. Sex becomes another stage where she can feel special, desired, superior, where she can gather further evidence of her power over you. She observes your reactions, gauges your desire, interprets every moan, every movement as confirmation of her irresistibility. And when this sexual validation doesn't come with the expected intensity, when you don't react like a man completely dazzled by the goddess before him, she interprets it as personal rejection and reacts with coldness, manipulation, emotional punishment, or even accusations that you don't truly desire her. For her, sex isn't about mutual pleasure, it's about affirming power. It's not about intimate connection, it's about emotional domination. She may even fake orgasms if it makes you feel more powerful and, consequently, more admiring of her. Or she may deliberately withhold pleasure to create insecurity in you and force you to work harder to satisfy her, increasing her sense of control over the situation. What's most fascinating about Freud's analysis of this behavior is how completely blind these women are to their own unhealthy dynamics. They genuinely believe they are special, that they deserve special treatment, that they are prizes to be won and venerated. This psychological blindness isn't pretense or conscious manipulation. It's a psychic defense mechanism so deep, so deeply rooted in the unconscious, that they truly inhabit this alternate reality where they are the center of the universe, To question this narrative, to suggest that perhaps they aren't as special as they believe, is to question their very identity, to threaten the very psychic structure that keeps them functioning. That's why they react with such emotional violence, with such disproportionate fury when confronted with the truth about themselves. It's like attacking a computer's operating system. Everything stops working. The tragedy is that the more you feed this superiority complex, the more you harm her and yourself. By treating her like the prize she believes herself to be, you confirm her neurosis and prevent her from developing a mature, functional personality capable of healthy relationships. You become complicit in an unhealthy dynamic that benefits no one, that only perpetuates suffering and dysfunction. And she, in turn, a prisoner of her own complex, will never be able to have genuine relationships because she is always playing a role, always performing superiority, always defending an image that doesn't correspond to reality. She can never be authentically vulnerable, genuinely human, truly intimate with anyone, because that would threaten the fantasy of perfection that sustains her identity. A man involved with a woman like this often develops what we might call a compensatory inferiority complex. It's as if there's an emotional seesaw where the higher she climbs in her fantasy of superiority, the lower he falls in his perception of his own worth. He begins to believe he's truly lucky to be with her, that he must constantly strive to earn her attention, that any moment of carelessness could result in the end of the relationship because she's so valuable she can choose anyone. His self-esteem becomes completely dependent on her approval, and he enters a downward spiral where he feels less and less valuable as a man, less confident, less capable. He stops investing in himself, his goals, his dreams, because all his energy is being drained to feed her insatiable ego. Ironically, and here lies one of psychoanalysis's cruelest revelations about this dynamic, the more he diminishes himself to elevate her, the more he sacrifices his own worth to confirm hers, the less she respects him and the less attraction she feels for him. This happens because, deep in her unconscious, she recognizes the unhealthy dynamic and despises his weakness, his lack of masculine backbone, his willingness to sacrifice himself to satisfy her. A woman with a superiority complex cannot feel genuine attraction to men who place her on pedestals. Her distorted psyche interprets adoration as weakness, devotion as a lack of options, sacrifice as desperation. This creates a cruel and inescapable psychological paradox. She demands adoration, but loses interest in those who adore her. She wants to feel special, but despises those who confirm her specialness. She demands princess treatment, but is only attracted to men who treat her like an ordinary person. It's a diabolical psychological trap in which both she and her partner become trapped in a neurotic dance that leads nowhere, only generating frustration, resentment, and the eventual destruction of the relationship. She is never satisfied because nothing is ever enough to fill the existential void that consumes her, and he is never satisfied because no matter how much he sacrifices, he can never truly earn her genuine love. Freud teaches us that these behavioral patterns and psychic structures are established in the early years of life and tend to repeat themselves compulsively throughout life, unless there is deep therapeutic intervention and arduous work of self-knowledge that few people are willing to undertake. A woman with this superiority complex will likely repeat the exact same destructive patterns in all her relationships, always blaming her partners for failure, always finding fault with men, never acknowledging her own contribution to the toxic dynamic. She can change men 1,000 times. She can blame them all for being inadequate. She can declare that there are no real men, but she will continue to encounter the same problems because the real problem, the source of all dysfunction, is within her, not in the people she chooses or attracts. It's like someone who wears dirty glasses and complains that the world is blurry. No matter where she looks, her vision will always be distorted. The most insidious and dangerous aspect of this complex is how it masquerades as female empowerment in our current culture. Modern society, confused and lost in gender roles, often confuses genuine awe. Self-esteem with pathological narcissism, arrogant behavior with healthy confidence. Many women have been deliberately taught by popular culture, the media, and social movements that behaving like a prize, demanding adoration, and never settling for less than royal treatment is a sign of high self-worth, of knowing yourself, of not putting yourself down. But there's a vast difference between genuinely knowing your worth as a person and creating a neurotic fantasy of superiority. A woman with healthy self-esteem doesn't need to diminish others to feel great. She doesn't need constant adoration to feel valuable. She doesn't turn relationships into competitions where she always needs to win, always needs to be the center of attention, always needs to feel superior to her partner. A truly confident woman builds relationships based on reciprocity, mutual respect, and joint growth. She gives as much as she receives, contributes as much as she demands, and invests as much as she expects others to invest in her. She is capable of genuine vulnerability, admitting mistakes, apologizing when necessary, and putting the needs of the relationship above her own wounded ego. Psychoanalysis reveals that these women with a superiority complex often choose partners they know unconsciously will fuel their neurosis. They have an internal radar for insecure, needy men with low self-esteem who are willing to sacrifice themselves to deserve a special woman. Subconsciously, they reject emotionally mature, confident, and balanced men who could challenge their distorted self-view, who wouldn't participate in constant validation games, and who would demand reciprocity in the relationship. It's a reversed and dysfunctional natural selection process, where the less emotionally fit meet and create toxic relationships that perpetuate and amplify the traumas, insecurities, and neuroses of both parties. The insecure man finds a woman who confirms that he needs to work hard to deserve love, and she finds a man who confirms that she is truly special and superior. When you finally recognize these patterns, when you understand the true psychological mechanics behind her behavior, when you see through the mask of arrogance and superiority, everything changes radically. You realize you're not dealing with a genuinely confident, valuable, and special woman, but with a wounded emotional child masquerading as an adult, with a deeply insecure person pretending to be superior. You understand that all that arrogance, all those impossible demands, all that insatiable need for validation are just an elaborate mask to hide a primal terror of not being loved, of being found ordinary, of being abandoned when people realize she's not truly extraordinary. And most importantly, you realize that it's not your responsibility, your mission, or your duty to heal her emotional wounds, feed her fantasies of grandeur, or sustain her dysfunctional psychological makeup. The mature man who has gone through the process of emotional development and self-discovery recognizes that genuinely valuable women, women who truly have something special to offer, don't need to constantly advertise their worth. They don't turn relationships into endless tests of devotion. They don't demand adoration to function emotionally. They don't create competitions where they always have to win. A woman of true value relates as an equal, gives as much as she receives, builds relationships based on reciprocity, mutual growth, and genuine support, not on power dynamics where she always needs to be on top, always needs to be treated as special, always needs to feel superior to her partner. Breaking free from this destructive dynamic for both you and her begins when you stop feeding her fantasy of superiority, when you refuse to participate in her constant validation games, when you treat her as an ordinary human being with qualities and flaws, strengths and limitations, and not as the untouchable goddess she imagines herself to be. Ironically, and this is one of psychology's most counterintuitive findings, it's only when you stop treating her as special, when you refuse to confirm her supposed superiority, that she has a chance to develop an authentic personality and functional relationships. By denying her the narcissistic validation she desperately craves, you force her psyche to confront reality, to deal with her real insecurities instead of hiding them behind fantasies of grandeur. But prepare yourself for the reaction, because it will be intense, disproportionate, and revealing. When you stop feeding her superiority complex, When you refuse to participate in the unhealthy dynamic, when you treat her like a normal person instead of a princess, she will likely react with fury, emotional manipulation, psychological blackmail, threats of abandonment, comparisons with other men who know how to treat her right, attempts to make you feel guilty for not recognizing how lucky you should feel. This happens because you're threatening the fundamental psychic structure that sustains her identity. You're attacking the defense system she spent years building to avoid facing her real insecurities. It's like taking a drug from an addict. Withdrawal is painful, desperate, and often aggressive. She may try different strategies to restore the previous dynamic. She may feign vulnerability to awaken your protective instinct. She may threaten to end the relationship to test whether you will beg for her. She may flirt with other men to reactivate your jealousy and competitiveness. She may create drama and crises to force you back into the role of adoring savior. All of these reactions are predictable and reveal exactly what's going on in her psyche. Absolute panic at the prospect of having to exist without constant validation, terror of discovering who she is when she's not being treated as special, fear of facing the insecurities she spent her entire life avoiding. The brutal truth this woman can't face, the truth she'll do anything to avoid having to accept, is that she's not a prize. She's not special. She's not superior. She's an ordinary person with normal insecurities, understandable fears, human flaws, and natural limitations like anyone else on the planet. And as long as she can't accept her own humanity, as long as she insists on maintaining the fantasy of superiority, as long as she demands to be treated like a goddess instead of a woman, she'll be doomed to superficial, empty relationships based on power dynamics, manipulation and validation, rather than genuine connection, real love, and mutual growth. Freud showed us that the unconscious never lies, that beneath all the masks and performances lies the raw truth about who we really are. Beneath all that elaborate performance of superiority, behind all that arrogance and impossible demands, lies an ordinary woman, insecure, terrified of discovering that perhaps she isn't as special as she always believed, that perhaps she's just another person seeking love and acceptance like everyone else. And it's precisely this existential terror, this primal fear of being ordinary, of being rejected, of not being special, that makes her an impossible partner for any man seeking a mature, balanced, and genuinely satisfying relationship. She can't offer real love because she's too busy performing superiority. She can't create genuine intimacy because she's hidden behind a mask of perfection. She can't build anything lasting because all her energy is focused on maintaining an illusion that doesn't correspond to reality. A man who understands these dynamics, who understands the psychological mechanisms behind these behaviors, is free to make conscious choices instead of being manipulated by unconscious structures he doesn't understand. He can choose to invest his emotional energy in women who offer reciprocity, who genuinely contribute to his life, who are capable of real love rather than just a constant demand for adoration. This channel doesn't romanticize toxic relationships, perpetuate destructive dynamics, or teach men to accept emotional crumbs from women who think they're prizes. This is psychoanalysis in its veins, a raw, unfiltered observation of human psychic reality, a merciless analysis of the unconscious mechanisms that govern our behavior, and a revelation of truths society prefers to ignore because they're too uncomfortable to face. If what you heard today bothered you, if anything said here generated anger, denial, or discomfort, it's because we touched a real wound, because we revealed something hidden but active in your unconscious. The truth always hurts before it frees, but it's the only thing that truly frees us to make conscious choices. Subscribe to the channel for more analyses that reveal the hidden psychological structures that govern our love lives. Share this video with men who need to understand these dynamics before it's too late, before they waste years of their lives feeding the neurosis of women who are incapable of offering genuine love. And always remember, knowing the truth about female psychology is not misogyny. It is male self-preservation. It is emotional intelligence. It is the difference between being manipulated by unconscious structures and making conscious choices about where to invest your time, energy, and heart.